Well, I need an extra shot of espresso to handle this one. This is a weird passage. Can we just be honest about that? Like, this is weird. Jesus opens up and says some really weird stuff, and we got to figure out what to do with it. Not many people have had a lot of, what's that? Like what? Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood. That's weird. Okay, that is really weird. And it's not just me that thinks that, by the way. The Romans thought that this was really weird too. The people who were not Christians, they're looking at the people who were Christians. Oh, I forgot the kids. You can't stick around for this one. We're talking about cannibalism. See, I told you gotta shake the rust off. I'm just like, oh, okay. Okay, before we get into the weirdness of this passage and how odd it is and what we actually can do with it, I need to tell you a story. I used to really like to give blood. Do we have any people that are like, whenever there's a Red Cross, you're like giving blood? That's great. I was told to go home. So there's a reason for that, though. There's a reason for that. When I was in college, they would always do blood drives every year. And I would show up, and I would give blood, and I would pass out for a little while. And then I would wake up, and they would take everything out, and I'd go my way. I thought that was normal, y'all. I really did. I just so one time I was there and the person didn't get up and go away. They put the IV thing in my arm and they were just sitting there, and I was like, oh, they're gonna watch me pass out. So I was like, hey, just so you know, I pass out every time. It's just something that happens. I get over it, so just don't freak out about it. And that person looked at me and they pulled the IV out. They put a Band-Aid on. They undid the little rubber band thing. They're like, you need to go. I was like, what? And they're like, no, you can't just pass out giving blood. That's not okay. That's not normal. You can't do that. For me, it was normal. I just well, everybody gets a little queasy when they get an IV, right? Everybody passes out when they get blood, right? Nope, just me. It was just me. And then then I started to question, well, why am I passing out when I get blood? It's not like I'm scared of needles or nervous about the moment or anything like that. I don't even get a queasiness in my stomach. I just turn white as a ghost and get that cold sweat, and then I'm just feels black, and then I come back and I'm like, okay, I'm all good. Well, I didn't know what it was for a while, but then I started to notice that it would do it in other places. I used to be a chef, not a chef in charge of a restaurant, but I was a cook at a 4-star restaurant. And I was really good at sharpening the chef knife on a slick steel. Have you ever done that? It is fun. I had to change the way I did it though. But normally I would take the chef knife and I would just do this on the slick steel. You seen those? They're files with a handle. And then you just do this and you go back and forth. And I was really good at it. People would stop and watch how fast I was with a slick steel. One time I was doing it. I was just going at it and people were like, wow, that guy's fast. He's really good at this. I missed the steel and hit my hand. And then I was like, ow, that hurt. And then I just kept going. And then I noticed everyone else turned pale, and I'm like, I wonder what their problem is. And then I look on the counter, and I'm like, oh, that's a piece of my finger. I was like, whoa, look at that. And then I look, and I'm like, I still have the scar on this finger. I was missing half of a penny size of my finger, and wasn't laying on the counter. And I'm like, ooh, that thing bled for 4 days. But I got queasy, not when I saw the blood or anything, but I looked down, and I'm like, there's a piece of my finger, whoa, and then I started to get a little, that pale whiteness came over me, and I'm like, what's going on? So it just happened then. But then I noticed it didn't happen with just me. I was in the restaurant, and the chef comes around the corner, and he's like, because I heard a guy cuss really loud in the corner, and I'm like, wonder what's wrong with that guy. The chef comes around the corner, and he's like, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to get a bag of ice. I was like, oh God, what are you going to ask me to do? He's like, there's a piece of his finger that's on the counter. We got to take him back. We got to take him to the hospital and get it put back on. And I need you to go get it. No joke. So I'm like, okay, no problem. And I go there and I see it on the thing, on the counter. And I'm like, whoa, that's a piece of the guy's finger. And again, white as a ghost, get all clammy and starts getting black. So I get like queasy with this whole thing. Not like nauseous, like I'm going to vomit, but like cold sweat, white, and just start like falling over. Turns out I got a condition because I told a surgeon about it, that I had a minor surgery. He's like, oh, that's vasovagal. I was like, huh? Vasovagal syncope. I was like, are you speaking English? Because I don't know what you're talking about. Turns out I got this guy here. It's a fainting spell caused by sudden dilation of blood cells in the legs. So that's me. He said I got vasovagal syncope. I was like, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but vasovagal syncope is a nervous system reaction to what's going on. I was like, how will you look at that? Like, he's like, it's a few people do have it, but my nervous system reacts to that kind of stuff, and I just like get all clammy and white, and it starts getting dark. So that's just what happens. So now I just know I need a shot of sugar right before I go and do some kind of a IV or anything like that, and I'm good to go. But I didn't know there was a thing. It's like a whole thing. I got an infographic about it right here. So if you've ever passed out giving blood, you might have vasovagal syncope. I don't know, maybe. So when I get into this passage, and Jesus is like talking to his disciples, and he says, oh, by the way, you need to eat my flesh and drink my blood. I'm just like, am I going to pass out reading this scripture up in front of everyone? Thank you for reading it, Chris, because it's like, this is like, whoa, I do feel a cold sweat coming on, by the way. I will not pass out in front of you because I have some coffee. That's helping with the dilation. Caffeine helps. So this is a weird passage. Jesus' followers thought it was weird. They're like, they turned around and walked out the door. They're like, see ya, we can't even know. And they just walked away. And early Romans thought it was weird. And they actually thought that Christians were cannibals. Early Roman church, first 150 to 200 years of the Christian church, we did not have total like domination like we do now, where we're like the leading religion. And we were just some weird like side thing that didn't even know what to call or do, because it was just a branch off of Judaism that was following a Messiah figure called Christ. Didn't even have a name for it. The Roman government they thought that like these Christians are weird, man. They're cannibals. They're talking about eating flesh and drinking blood and all this stuff, and it came directly out of this passage. So there was 3 accusations that the early church had to take from the Roman church. Roman government accused Christians of being atheists, incestuous, fun one, and cannibalistic. And the reasons were, we refused to worship the Roman pantheon of gods. They had like a plethora of gods, and everyone had to worship all their gods to be in the Roman Empire. But the Christians were like, no, we just have one, and we don't want to. So they called us atheists, and they thought that's like a threat to our way of living. They also called us incestuous because we referred to each other as brother and sister even when we were married. They're like, we're Christian brothers, we're Christian sisters, we're all on equal ground. There's nobody higher or lower than another person. There wasn't an authoritative hierarchy or anything. We were all like together as siblings in Christ. And they didn't understand that. And they're like, did that guy just marry his sister? That's weird. So they thought that was another accusation that was laid out against the Christians. And the third one is the one we're talking about today. They ate the flesh and drank the blood of Jesus at their gatherings. What's that all about? So the Christian faith freaked the Roman government out because they thought that we were very superstitious. Now you all got that song in your head, don't you? That was like one of my favoriteest songs ever. They thought we were superstitious because you're not going to... Actually, the Roman government was very superstitious, actually. Because they thought, if everyone doesn't worship all of our gods, they're going to get mad at us and send a famine. And so Christians saying, no, we're not going to worship any of your gods, became a threat to how they ordered their entire society. Because if you're not worshiping that one God that gives us, bounty in our harvests, that one God's going to get mad and then going to send a famine, and that's going to affect everybody. So they were really mad at Christians for not worshiping all of the different gods that they had. And they thought they had like a whole hierarchy class system where slaves were at the bottom, and then like Epicurean style, like politicians were at the top. They didn't really have a total monarchy, but they had a whole class system and everything in between. And that class system was how they operated. The slaves ran society, and then the people at the top benefited from everything. And then these Christians would gather together for worship, which was gathered around a meal, like communion, except it was a full-blown like dinner, like Thanksgiving dinner. And they would all gather, and they would say, your class system doesn't work in here. Like, you're coming in as a slave, we do not regard you as a slave. And the slaves were like, this is amazing. Like, we're not treated poorly here in this society. But then the Epicurean, the person high up, walks in, they're like, you're not an Epicurean here, you're just a brother or a sister. And they're like, they had to get used to that. There was no class system in there. And that threatened the way that they ordered their society. So Christianity was a threat to the way that they ordered society. The Roman response was hard persecution against the church for the first couple hundred years. And we don't need to go into specifics, but it was brutal. It was difficult to be a Christian during those times. The emperors did not like it. There was people, like this guy, he said, Christians are a class of men given to a new and mischievous superstition. That's a Roman person that actually said that. He was I don't know, Suetonius or something like that. Suetonius said that. Tacitus, he said this, their originator, speaking of Christians, Christ, had been executed in Tiberius' reign by the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. But in spite of this temporary setback, this deadly superstition is broken out not only in Judea, but even in Rome. All degraded and shameful practices collect and flourish in that capital. Like, well, that's the Roman governor. That's the emperor's, like, right-hand, left-hand man. This is what he's saying about the people of the Christian church early on. And there's a huge misunderstanding about what is happening during, like, communion, when we do partake of the communion elements, because of John 6, where Jesus says, you got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And the term, I don't know if you know this, I learned this one this week. The term hocus pocus. Y'all know hocus pocus? The term hocus pocus it originates from the Latin, here is my body, which is what the priest says when he presents communion. Because during communion, in some traditions, they believe that there is an elemental change of the actual bread to turn into the actual body of Christ, even though it tastes the same as bread. And so the Greek or the Latin phrase sounds a lot like, I have it down here somewhere. It is called hocus de something. So it actually means, hocus pocus means, here is my body. It magically turns into something else when I say this prayer. That's the term of the origin of hocus pocus. I didn't even know that until this week, but it came from the Latin phrase, here is my body. But what the Roman church had a difficult time with was how the church was ordering itself, and worshiping was a direct challenge to how they had organized themselves by getting rid of the class system and by having these different worship gatherings together that had these weird practices. So this is difficult stuff to hear, though. Even Jesus' disciples were like, we don't like this. Personally, I have no idea what happens during communion. I don't know. There's 3 different things that people have said happen in communion. Troy covered those last week, where it changes into the actual physical body and blood, or it's a spiritual presence, or it's just a symbol. I don't really know. It's not something that my brain is really concerned about. But we've been arguing about it for about 1,000 years or so. So I don't think we're going to figure it out today, but we don't need to. But this is what Jesus' disciples said when they heard this phrase. They said, you. No, we're walking away. And they walked away. Because Jesus says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, it's like, what? Now, if you dive into the actual Greek terminology, it's even grosser. Because the term for eat is when a dog is gnawing on a bone. Have you ever seen that? Like a dog is gnawing on the bone? It's like, arr, 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 arr. So unless you gnaw on and chew on my flesh. And the word for my body is not there's like two different words for body. There's soma and there's sarx. There's two different Greek words for body, soma and sarx. The difference is, soma means the magazine cover version of you. Your Instagram, TikTok presence, like you're curated, this is what I look like. And then your sarx is like when you wake up in the morning and you like have that stank breath and you're like, I'm not taking a picture of this. Like it actually means like you're sweaty, stinky person, humanity. So there's two different things. They're like you get all like dolled out and go out on the town, you're like presenting soma, right? You're like, this is the idealized picture of me. But then you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, Lord have mercy, I haven't showered yet, and I didn't put on all the deodorants and things. That's your sarx. And Jesus is saying, unless you, like, gnaw on my sarx, can't be a part of me. It's like, what is even going on with this passage? So is anyone else confused? Is anyone else like, why is he even saying this stuff? Yeah, that's me too. I didn't know what to do with this passage. But this passage is just weird like that. And it has caused so much different divisions and arguments, and people didn't know what to do. Now, the people in this group that heard Jesus say these words, they're like, sorry, we're going to have to leave now because that was just like too much for us to handle. And the word there that they use is murmurings. People started to murmur and complain about each other, with each other. Now, a good way to think about this. When people are murmuring, it's supposed to, like, it's the same verb as used when the people of Israel in the Old Testament were wandering around the desert and they would, like, complain to Moses. It's like, oh, we want food and water. Okay, so do I. But, you know, they're like complain, like, it'd be better if we went back to Egypt. That murmurings is the same verb. And so we're supposed to think of, like, have you ever been on a road trip? Have you ever been on a road trip with kids? Maybe you've been on a road trip with young kids. And what's the favorite phrase? Are we there yet? I remember as a kid, like we would take trips to Canada and we would cross the bridge and we'd go over and we'd go up to this cabin that my great-grandpa had in Kettle Point, Canada, right on the shores of Lake Huron. And we'd spend time there. I loved it up there because I got to hunt for frogs. Like that's not something you can do in Detroit. I grew up in the city. No frogs around there. I actually took frogs home with me and set them loose in my backyard, hoping that I would like get frogs. Didn't work. I don't know where they went. But here's an actual picture of me as a kid going out on a family road trip. Wait, that's Chevy Chase. Sorry, wrong picture. But that would be one of the things that I would do to like not complain so much is my parents would get me, you remember those sticker books? They're like coloring books, but they had stickers in the back. Then you would take the sticker off and then you'd go to the page and then you'd like put the sticker on there and then you'd color the rest of it. I loved those things as a kid. Kept me busy for at least 20 minutes, like for like a 2.5 hour drive. It was like, okay, we're going to get you 2 books this time. And so I would go and I would do all the stickers and I would put all the stickers throughout the whole thing. And then I'd go and I'd color some and do all the puzzles in there and all the stuff. After about a half hour, you know, I'm done. And, you know, the question I'm going to go to is like, we there yet? Like, how much longer? And they're like, 2 hours. How long is 2 hours? You know, I was like, well, that's like, you know, watching an episode of G.I. Joe 4 times. I'm like, 4 times? With or without commercials? Like, it's like, seriously, how long is this going to take? And then coming home is even worse because, you know, you don't have the excitement of I'm about to go like do the thing. No, it's like coming home is just like, this is taking forever. And then I remember driving home. I'd be like, how long? Hour and a half. It's like, so that means it's a half of an hour? Okay, 30 minutes left. I'm like thinking in my head, and they're like, no, times that by 3. I was like, oh, hour and a half, not a half of an hour. So I'd like doing all this stuff to try and keep my complaining down to a minimum. Didn't work very well because I was a kid and didn't want to partake of that. But Jesus' disciples here, there's 12 disciples and then there's 72 disciples on top of that. Those 72 were just like, we're out. Peace out, Jesus. We're out of here. Sorry. we don't like this teaching. It's a little weird. It's a little creepy. It's a little over the top for us. We're not going to handle this. And they kind of walked away. And they walked away. And Jesus turns to the other disciples and he says, what about you guys? You going to walk away? Are you done too? Like, I know this is hard, but are you done too? You going to walk away? Now, we have to remember why this story was written. Because it's not just like Time magazine, or like a newspaper, like let's just record what happened and how it happened and what went down. Like, we're just going to record the history of something that happened. That's not the primary motive of the people who wrote down the scriptures, to communicate the history of the thing that happened. They, first and foremost, are trying to communicate theology to a group of people experiencing a problem. And that's called the context of the scripture. When you don't understand the context of it, things get weird fast. We don't understand it. So it's important to know, like, the context of something. So if you're having a hard time understanding something, it's probably because you're separated by, like, an entire ocean and 2 millennia and a couple of different cultures and, dynasties that have risen and fallen over the course of a couple 2,000 years. We're separated very far from the context of when this stuff was written down, which is what makes it very difficult to understand. So we have to understand, this was not just written like, well, Jesus said this that one time, and he said this that one time, and it's like, they're experiencing problems. Remember what those Romans were saying about the Christians? Like, they're weird, and they're cannibalistic, and they're incestuous, and they're like this, like that kind of stuff. This church is experiencing the weight of that. The church is experiencing the weight of the culture that they're in, looking at them and saying, you can't do that. No, we don't like how you're doing things. We don't like that you are so different from the way that we operate. That's not working for us. Like, we don't like that you challenge the very fabric of our society by offering people, like, inclusion. Like, we don't like that you are saying that there is no class system that separates the bottom from the top. We don't like how you include women and let them, like, teach and do all this stuff. That's not something that they're saying all these different things because Christians were a direct challenge to the ways Romans organized their society. They weren't ideas. These weren't just like theological ideas that people had a problem with. They were actually like, we don't like how you organize yourself because it's different than the way we organize ourselves. One of my favorite theologians, Stanley Hauerwas, he said this: the church doesn't have a social strategy. It is a social strategy. The way that we operate is supposed to be one of the most welcoming and including places on the planet. This is how it worked from the beginning. It's not supposed to be an exclusionary, short little club that then has all these hoops and hurdles that you have to jump over to get in and be a part of the cool kids club. Like, that was much later. That way of thinking developed so much later. And the way that the church operated was an entire threat to the way that the Romans operated, because they operated on the systems of injustice that says, well, if we get rid of the whole slavery system, then how are we gonna like organize our entire way of being? Like, they run the whole place. If we gave them a say, if we gave them a vote, that would be horrible, because it would totally crumble the way we've organized our society. And so the church didn't have like a social strategy, like how can we go and do these things out there in the public square? They just were one. And that was a big threat to the way that the Romans like organized themselves. And Jesus actually says, are you offended by this saying? Does this offend you guys? And they're like, well, yes, it does. It does offend. And this is a flashback to Moses in the wilderness. The people would pick up like manna from the wilderness when they were wandering, like 2,000 years before that point. They're like picking up manna in the wilderness. That's how God fed these people, according to their stories. God just like rained bread from heaven. They pick it up and they eat it for the day. So Jesus is trying to call back like the roots of their the stories that they've been telling themselves for a long, long, long time. And the word for offended is actually the same word we get our word scandalized. Have you ever been scandalized before? Like, what does the word scandalized mean? It's not necessarily to be caught up in a scandal. It's the emotion you feel when you encounter something that you think is just absolutely not okay. Here's a great illustration. I am scandalized by this picture. Pineapple on pizza? Like, really? Scandalized to shock someone with an action or opinion thought of as immoral or wrong. Pineapple? Really? Guys, pineapple on a pizza? I've never once ate a pizza and said, you know what belongs on this? Pineapple. That is great. There's two kinds of people in this world. The people who don't like pineapple on their pizza, you know? Some people are like, I love pineapple on my pizza. All right. I'm scandalized by that, but I'll let you have your thing. I'll let you have your thing. So this is the word scandalized. Jesus says, are you scandalized? Not just offended, like, oh, I'm offended, I'm going on my way. But like, I'm scandalized. Like, do you think what I just said is absolutely immoral and wrong at the most visceral level of where you hold your values? That's when you're scandalized. When someone challenges the value system at your very core. Sometimes the value system at our very core is not necessarily right. It's just something that we're holding on to. Sometimes it is right. Scandalized is when something challenges that. And we're just like, oh my gosh, absolutely not. This can never be, never happen. That's what scandalized is. So basically what Jesus is saying here is like, if you think this is wrong, wait till you see what I do next. Okay, that's a really interesting phrase. He's like, this, you think this is a scandal where I'm telling you to eat my body and drink my blood? You think that's a scandal? You should wait and see what I do next. What did he do next? That's the crazy part. He died. It's like, you think communion is a scandal? Wait until I challenge the very fabric of society and they put me to death. And then I resurrect on the other side. Like, you think this is a scandal? Wait until I am actually glorified and ascend back to the Father from where I came. You think this is a scandal? Communion is a scandal? Just you wait. So this is supposed to get us thinking, like the whole story. Where does this thing end? We're supposed to think about the scandal of the resurrection of Christ is a scandal. Because Jesus challenged the religious and governmental authority of his day, and he was crucified for blasphemy and treason. We got to remember that. He wasn't just crucified in a religious context. He was crucified in a social context, an economic context, a political context. Yes, there was religion added to that context as well. But we have like 2,000 years of theology to add to this place. But Jesus was not holy enough for the religious people, and he wasn't faithful enough to the governmental authorities. They had him crucified and died. So he's saying, you think communion's a scandal? Wait till you see that I challenge the very fabric of our society, how it's unjustly set up to benefit few while the rest of society is all messed up. Just wait till I challenge that. And now he doesn't take up the sword and then like lead the charge against Rome and say, let's kill everybody. That's what they were hoping he'd do. He says, I'm going to let them kill me. I'm going to be perfectly loving and obedient. Let them crucify me. And just you wait. The scandal is, y'all are going to think that I lost. But really, my perfect obedience to God and my perfect love towards all humans is what is going to raise me on the other side. That's a scandal, because everyone said, no, power's the way you get stuff done. If you want to get stuff done, you got to grasp for power, get the power, and then wield the power. And Jesus says, well, that's one way, but you do a lot of wounding along the way, and you forget like 80% of the rest of society also. That doesn't benefit everybody. Love is what heals everything. Power doesn't. Power wounds. Power can hold evil at bay, but only love can heal evil. And Jesus says that's going to be the biggest scandal you've ever seen in your life. Is when I use the most powerful force in the entire universe, which is love. And I show you that love, when in its perfect form, cannot even be defeated by death, but transcends, walks through unscathed. That's a scandal. He's like, you think this whole communion thing's a scandal? Just wait until I resurrect. And then you just wait until I ascend back to the Father in glory. He's saying glory is not like you grasp for power, you wield the power, and then you win. And you get all the glory, and you got all the trophies. And Jesus says, I'm going to turn that system on its head. I'm going to die, and I'm going to be buried. I'm going to be utterly defeated, and y'all are going to walk away from me, and everyone's going to betray me and walk away from me, and that is the path to glory. He says, that's going to be a scandal. It's like, just wait. You think what I'm saying here is a scandal? Just you wait until the resurrection and the ascension happens. That will scandalize the way you see the entire world. And so that's this purpose. John inserts a phrase that is totally like off the wall. Like, eat my flesh, drink my blood. No other gospel writer says it that bluntly. And then that becomes how we get all these like arguments in communion and theologies about communion. That one phrase right there. And Jesus, he inserts that in order to make the point later. He says, you think this is hard to handle? Just wait till I resurrect, until I ascend to the other side. I like what James Cone, one of my favorite theologians, said. The gospel of Jesus is not a rational concept to be explained in a theory of salvation, but a story about God's presence in Jesus' solidarity with the oppressed, which led to his death on the cross. What is redemptive is the faith that God snatches victory out of defeat, life out of death, and hope out of despair. That's a scandal right there. It's not a theory, it's not a theology to stuff in our heads and get right so that you can like pass some holy quiz when you die so that you can go into heaven. That's not what it's about. It's a whole different way of ordering your life around a whole different value system entirely, one of love. And Jesus says, just you wait, that's going to be a scandal. And then he says, not everyone here believes me. There's one of you that's going to betray me. And we all know that he's speaking of Judas. There's betrayal and there's rejection. Because those who don't believe, they just walk away. They're just like, yeah, no, I don't think so. And they walk away. They rejected Jesus, but they didn't betray Jesus. Judas betrayed Jesus. What's the difference? It's those who can't see what God is doing will reject God and say, I don't quite get it. No, I want to walk away. It's totally different than looking and seeing what God is doing and saying, I don't like what God is doing. That's the betrayal of Judas compared to the walking away of the 70 disciples. Like, they're going to swing back around and be like, oh, wow, we had that wrong. Jesus is the Messiah. They're going to swing back around. Judas, there's a difference between betrayal and rejection. Like, you can not understand what God is up to and just kind of like say, I don't get it. I don't understand it. And have a rejection of God that God does not take personally. Because God understands how your brain is working and how you can't connect the dots in your brain. That's okay. You can be rejecting of God in the intellect, and that's all right. Because you can't connect the dots and you just kind of walk away and you're like, I don't get it, I don't understand it. But if you see what God is doing and you say, I do not like what God is doing. I don't like how God is inclusive of the people that I am not inclusive of. I don't like how God doesn't hate the people that I hate. I don't like that God doesn't do this or is doing this. Like, that's the betrayal that Judas did. That's totally different than just saying, I don't get it, I don't see it, I can't put it all together in my brain, so you don't adopt it. That's entirely different. But when you see, like Judas, and you have that betrayal, like, So Jesus then, they walk away, Jesus turns to the 12, he's like, you guys too? I know it's hard, but are you guys going to walk away? And they say, well, where are we going to go? Like, I don't have another place to live. This is my job now. I don't know what to do. And Peter actually is going to be, after Jesus dies, he's like, well, I guess I'm going fishing because I used to be a fisherman. I'm going to take up my old job, trying to rebuild my old life and figure that out. And then he meets the resurrected Christ. But they say something, where can we go? You're the one who has the words of life. Like, where can we go? I don't know. Where else are we going to go? What else are we going to do? We agree with what you're saying, so we're here. We're with you. It's hard, it's difficult, but we're with you. I don't know about you, but I get turned around really fast. That whole thing that says women have no sense of direction and men do, does not apply to me. I don't know if I'm an exception to the rule or if that is just an over-genderization of something, but my wife, she knows, like, no, that way is south. We should just turn that way. I'm like, how do you know? Like, we've been on a back road and we've turned like 10 times. I don't get it. Like, I've been out in the woods and I'm like, I need a compass because I don't even know which direction is the road anymore. Like, I get lost really fast. Right? Like, but my wife, she'll be like, how can you not know what direction north is? Like, it's just this way. I'm like, how do you know that it is? She's always right. And I always get lost. I always get lost, which is why I'm so thankful for GPS on my phone. Because now I just type it in, I'm like, this is gonna like tell me turn in 10 feet. Like, okay, I can do that. I don't have one of those for the woods though, when I'm out in the woods and I'm just like, I'm turned around, I don't know which way to go. I've gotten lost a couple of times. But Jesus looks at the disciples and he says, are you gonna go too? And here's the thing that I noticed. They don't say no. That's interesting. They didn't make a commitment and say, you know what, Jesus, we are with you to the end. They didn't say that, did they? Are you going to leave too? They're like, I want to, but where else are we going to go? They didn't say no. They didn't make a commitment. They didn't stand up and say, yes, we're going to totally trump this whole Jesus thing. Yes, absolutely. No, they didn't. They absolutely did not do that. They said, I guess we're sticking with you. Where else are we going to go? You have the words of life. So where else are we going to go? What else are we going to do? They didn't say no. They didn't say yes either. They just says, we don't really have many options at this point. So I guess we're sticking with you. Jesus honored that. Like, Jesus honored that. He's like, all right, follow me then. Like, they did not triumphantly, yay, we're with you, Jesus. There's like, well, we could turn back, but we already gave up our jobs. And so I don't know what else we're going to do. We have no other choice at this point. We're here. And there is a difference between believing and knowing. Jesus says this at the end. He says, the disciple says, we have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. We understand that part. What's the difference between believing and knowing? I had that question. I'm like, are they just like using the same word twice or what? There's a big difference between believing and knowing. Believing is a verb. To entrust something to someone else. That's something. Like, I entrust my paycheck to the bank, and then I take a little plastic thing to the store, and I do a swipey, and I don't even think about it. Like, I know the bank is not going to swindle my money out from under me, right? Like that just doesn't happen every day. So I trust, air quotes, the bank, that they have my money, and this little plasticky, swipey, cardy thing gives me access to that money, and they're not going to go to the horse track with my money and, blow all the money on betting or something. Like, we have laws against that kind of a thing. It's called embezzlement. So I know there's like an entrustment. I take the paycheck, it goes in the bank. That's just how we do things. I believe that they're going to give me access to the funds that I have. There's a belief there. That's a believing, but it is a verb that shapes how I live. But then there's knowing. Knowing is an experiential understanding of something. Believing is an entrusting that shapes the way you act and live. And then knowing is like an experiential understanding of something. I know woodworking. Like, I know woodworking. I do not know, like, engines. If I take apart an engine, I'm going to need to call somebody to help me put it back together. But if you tell me I need a shelf, and it needs to be this dimensions and this wide and have this look, yeah, I'll go out to the garage, I'll make it. Because I have done woodworking and I have this experiential knowledge of I can shape wood the way I need it to be shaped and make it to do what I need it to do. Experiential knowledge of something that gives me skills and access to do that. I don't have that with engines. Can't do it with bikes. I tried to tune up my son's bike a couple years ago. Man, it was worse off after I was done with it. Like, I just can't do it. But you give me like 2x4s or even like a 1x4, like, yeah, I'll turn that into whatever you want. I made a porch swing for my mom that was made out of cedar that was this big, and it just like went to town. I made it, and it's still standing. It's still good. Like, that's the difference between belief and no. They're saying, like, we have entrusted you, Jesus, with our lives, and we have this experiential knowledge that you're going to do something good with it. We trust you. We believe you. We have come to believe, and we have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. So Howard Thurman says whatever may be the tensions and the stresses of a particular day, there is always lurking close at hand the trailing beauty of forgotten joy or unremembered peace. There have been times when things are really hard and you just totally forget what it was like to not be this hard. Maybe you've been there. But there were times when you had joy. There were times when you had peace. There were times when you understood what's going on. The disciples in this moment are saying, yes, this is hard. Yes, Rome is persecuting us. Yes, this is, people think we're crazy. They're doing all these accusations against us. Yes, we understand this is hard, but we remember. We remember what it's like that you are entrusting, holding our lives in your love. We know this. We trust this. We know this. So whatever the tensions and stresses of your life are, whenever it gets really hard, that does not define all of reality. It just, your anxiousness creeps in and silences those places of joy and peace that are still there. You just don't have access to them in the midst of anxiety. So when things are really hard and accusations are flying and all this crazy stuff's going on, remember, there is peace and there is joy in the midst of it. It just might be covered over with a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of craziness. So have you ever felt, man, this is hard and I'm not up for this, or I have no idea what any of this means? The disciples have as well. Disciples do not avoid, dismiss, or deny these questions which travel through them. That's what the disciples did. They're not going to be like, oh, we're just cliche this moment. You, Jesus, you're fine. You're fine. Absolutely. We're with you, man. We're with you till the end. They didn't say that. What side of the question do you want to turn away to? Are you on? And what are some trailing beauties of forgotten joy in your life? That you can be like, you know what, things are hard, doesn't make sense, I don't get it, but I do remember that time, that phrase, that feeling, that saying, that something. I hold on to it. Those are the 4 reflection questions for today. I have a benediction from Psalm 34, rewritten in sonnet form by Malcolm Guite. It says this: He raises and delivers us from death, and even now He shows us how to live, that we might savor life with every breath, that we might taste and see, might truly thrive, might see the good days that He wants for us, and makes the best of all that He has to give. And so He comes to live as one of us and teaches us afresh the ways of peace. He lives the fullest life in front of us and shows us how to break the bonds, release the captives, seek the truth that sets us free, to choose the right and do it, to increase the reach of love, the possibility of fruitful life together, and to hear the poor cry out and help them speedily. Psalm 34, retold by Malcolm Guite. Amen.